I'm Jen, and I'll be your speaker for today's workshop, which is framing and setups. I know that you're currently seeing me without a PowerPoint slide, but don't worry, I have that later. So like it's way easier to like digest all the information and stuff. But first of all, I just want to say thank you a lot for coming to Debating 404's first ever like online seminar, online workshop. So we really appreciate everyone that has come and everyone that has submitted their setups, or maybe you can also submit your setups later if you want to get them reviewed. In case you missed it, I'll just drop the Google form link here. So like, I think the main purpose of this workshop is just the engagement that we want to have in terms of like setups, and like maybe you can submit there like your recent cases so that I can review your setups for you, and like so that you know how to better improve on that and stuff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to engage with like everyone here really, and there will be a question session at the end as well. So just wait for that. Right, so I'm going to like start sharing my screen here now. Just wait a second. Okay. Just a minute. Yep, so can someone just confirm, wait, not that. Can someone just confirm that this Google Slides is visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Oh yeah, I'm seeing you guys in the chat. Thank you for everyone that eagerly said yes. Okay, so the topic that we're going to talk about today is how to make a solid setup, and I'm going to conduct the workshop. So before we actually begin going into the content of this workshop, I just want to say a thank you to our media partners, Mainland Debaters Forum, which I'm sorry if I butchered the name, and also Digital Matter Files as well, and our sponsor who made this like seminar possible, which is CV Buah Berdikari, an Indonesian coffee exporter company. And thank you as well to all members of Debating 404 and everyone who has helped host this event as well, especially Daiwik, who led the coordination of this event. So thank you for making this possible. I'm very, very happy to be here. Right, let's move on to what the seminar is about. Just a quick disclaimer. So this is going to be a practice-oriented workshop. And it's a mini workshop at that as well. So it's not going to be like a very, very extensive, long workshop about how to make setups. I'm going to just make like all the theory stuff quick, because I feel like if you want stuff in detail, there's already tons of workshops on the internet that are probably made by way better speakers than me. So I just want this to be something that's focused on engagement and focused on like examples of how to apply the setup theories that we're going to talk about. And this is going to be based on my personal formula. So it's also something that has worked for me, but might not work for, might not definitely work for you. But I guarantee you that there are still like things that you can learn from this. And the personal formula is these 4 things that I will be explaining briefly later: problem, stance, burdens, and model. Right, so let's just get into it. Right, the first thing that I want to talk about is problem, or problem identification. Basically, just you reading the motion very, very carefully and identifying what is the likely problem out of this motion. I think there are just, okay, yeah, okay. There are just largely 2 things that you need to identify when you're doing like the problem identification, which is like the first part of your setup. And those 2 things are identifying the problem and the vulnerable actor as well. So when you see a motion, for example, like something like this house would restrict the coverage of terrorist attacks in the media, for example, right? So if you see that motion, the first thing that you want to try to analyze is why the motion was created and what problem arose, like so that it was created. And I think if it was like the motion that I mentioned before about like terrorist attacks being restricted in the media, the reason that you might want to do that is because terrorists benefit in some way when they appear in the media. And then you start to think, what kind of benefit do they have, right? And it's probably attention, because like the media spotlights you and gives you a lot of attention. That means like your legitimacy or like your fear factor as a terrorist organization is going to increase. And that's why you probably want to limit that coverage, right? So that's like a problem identification like example that you can actually have. And the reason that this is important is because if you skip to that step, you probably would just directly think about, oh, what are the benefits of limiting the coverage of terrorist attacks? Maybe some people who are easily triggered can then be can be protected from triggers. Maybe the media becomes just a more comfortable, safe space in general, right? But that doesn't guarantee that your arguments are going to be important in the debate, because only if it's going to be crucial to the problem that was that was the reason why the motion was created, is your argument going to be important. So that's why this is like, I think, usually the first step that you have to take. And the way that you do this is by reading the motion very, very carefully and thinking why it was likely made. The next thing that you can analyze is vulnerable actors. So who are the people who are like the most vulnerable people in the debate, and who like your side can protect as well? I think this is not something that is like, necessarily something that you say in your setup. It's more of a case building strategy perhaps, but it can also appear in things like your opening, for example. If you point out that the most vulnerable actor in the debate are actually maybe the victims of the terrorist attacks, if we're talking about the motion before, or maybe if you're debating about usually like feminist movements, then you can talk about certain types of women. Maybe the most vulnerable actors are women who have like low wages, for example, or maybe it's conservative women who don't have access to liberal ideologies. But the benefit of like analyzing who the most vulnerable actor is going to be that you are protecting the most important actor in the debate, who is most defenseless and who you have the biggest responsibility towards as well, usually. And this can make your argument win. This can make your argument significant. This can make your argument tip over like the opponent's argument, because maybe the opponent is protecting some people, but they haven't analyzed why those people are the most vulnerable, the most important to protect, the most important to prioritize in that motion. So like that's why things like identifying the vulnerable actor can be important as well during problem identification. And the way that you want to like manifest this in your setup is usually just in the opening line. If you think the motion is just a broad motion applied to a like general problem, then just like use an opening that mentions what the problem is. If you think the motion seeks to protect a specific vulnerable actor, then just use that as your opening as well. And that goes a long way for like the case later on if you've identified the problem. But like in terms of like deploying it in the setup, it's probably just like an opening line. But I think this is just a very, very crucial step in like just constructing your setup and your team's like case direction. So that's like about problem identification. The next thing that makes a good setup is a stance. So this is not something that is always going to be important in every motion. Only specific motions have stances that are less obvious than others. So maybe motions like this house opposes social consumerism is something that's like very, very easy because you just oppose social consumerism and that's it. But then if you become, for example, the opposition in like a ban motion, for example, I don't know, this house would ban, like, can't think of something other than like the classic smoking example right now, but like, yeah, maybe this house would ban smoking. You actually have a lot of options when you're in the opposition, right? You could say you'll just enable smoking for everyone. You'll make it very free. You can restrict it. And there are like just multiple stances that you can choose. If you're an opposition in an IR debate as well, it's usually also the case that you have the chance to have a counter proposal, for example, or you can have the choice to just stick in the status quo. In social movements debates as well, you usually have that option. So I think the way that you can just do this well is to check for possible stances and to pick the most strategic stance that'll actually allow the arguments that you have picked to run the best. And I think a good example of this is actually like this motion from HWS round robin that Dan Lahab actually won. I think if I remember it correctly, it was something along the lines of like, this house would ban the strategy of decapitation in combating terrorism. And decapitation is just like killing the heads of the terrorist organizations, basically, right? And so government side wants to ban that strategy of decapitation. Opposition has a choice of just allowing it in general, or the stance that the opposition in the debate actually chose, which is that we are still going to allow this strategy, but we're going to use it strategically. We're not going to use it at all times. We're only going to use it in specific times where it's going to be helpful. And I think the reason that that's strategic is because like it enables you to access all the benefits of that strategy while strategically avoiding the harms that the government side has thrown at you, because all of those harms can be avoided if only you are careful with picking what kind of strategy you want to use at the right time. So like that makes the government have to like explain an extra burden of why it cannot be used strategically, why you're always going to not be able to pick and choose very well, and why the strategy is probably going to be inherently harmful, even if you're going to choose it strategically and whatnot. But basically it makes the opponent's job a lot harder, and that's why it's a strategic stance. So you want to think about what kind of like arguments from your opponent does that stance prevent. You also want to think about what kinds of arguments from your side does that stance make it easier to like come out. So like that's what makes an important stance. And the next thing in like making a good setup is to define burdens. And this is roughly, I think, so far, just about two things. If I could like simplify it, make it as simple as possible. It's about what the debate is about and not about, and also what the government and opposition have to defend. So an example of this is of like, let's say what the debate is about and not about. An example of this, I think, is in motions about this house regrets the dominance of, or like the trend of. Maybe it's like this house regrets the trend of families living apart. Then the debate is about the trend. The debate is about like that rise in popularity of families living apart. And the debate is not about family living apart bad, family living apart good. But please mute yourself. Hello. Can somebody just, yeah. Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, so you can quickly point out from the get-go, from your setup, that the debate is about a side that has a lot of people like living apart from their families, and the opposing side, they have less people living apart with their families. And that has gigantic implications, I think, in the debate, because you don't really care whether like living apart is good or bad, but if it's a trend, maybe there's like more chances to check and balance it. Maybe there's more discourse around it, right? So like you can bring more nuanced arguments in this way if you really take a close look at the motion and you define what the debate is about and what the debate is not about. So that's how you define burdens strategically and like deliver the arguments that are most relevant to the motion. The next thing is like what government and opposition have to defend. So I think this is just like ensuring that the comparatives from the get-go is going to be a fair comparative for those teams. So maybe in a this house prefers a world motion, the opposition usually is like the opposition has to defend the status quo. They cannot defend an alternative world that they want to conceive by themselves, like with their convenience, right? So you want to make clear that what the opposition has to defend is the status quo in that debate, for example, or what they have to defend is like a realistic counterfactual if it's a this house celebrates or this house regrets motion, right? So say you're in opposition in a this house regrets motion. Maybe it's like, I don't know, this house regrets like this house regrets this house opposes the cult of productivity, maybe. That can also apply. If you're the opposition in that motion and you want to like push a burden to the government team, you have to say, if there is no cult of productivity, you have to depict a realistic scenario where like people are still going to be motivated enough to be productive, even though there's like no friends of the same cult who support them, for example. And they cannot just be like saying everyone will be relaxing, everyone will be mentally healthy. They obviously cannot say that. They have to prove what the counterfactual is going to be and like why it's going to be beneficial for their side, because there is no like fiat, there is no power for the government side in a this house opposes motion to just say, well, this is definitely going to be the alternative world if this norm didn't exist, for example. They have to like defend an alternate world with a reason for why that is the alternate world. So like that's how you want to define burdens. And the key to this skill is the ability to know like what a motion implies. So again, like the thing that's most important in the setup is just like really paying attention to the motion and interpreting it in a way that is like, you know, strategic and actually beneficial for your side. So you want to define the burdens correctly in that way. So that's how you define burdens. Yeah, the last thing in terms of making a setup is making a good model. And I think I prefer to integrate some stuff that people prefer to separate in here. So some people separate their definition from their model, but I prefer to just integrate it because it's all really about what the debate looks like. So I would like just have my model be a combination of a definition, what the world looks like, a proposal if you need to, like if you need to make an extra proposal, and preemptive status quo mechanisms as well. So like maybe in debates about religion that you see like a potential for extremism arguments to arise, but you don't want them to arise, maybe you can make preemptive status quo mechanisms of like the criminal justice system existing, so people are not going to be that easily, you know, consumed by extremist teachings and stuff. They still have like an incentive to not go to jail and stuff. So like that's an example of preemptive status quo mechanisms. For the rest, I'm just quite sure that you already know. Definition is just like if there are obscure words in the motion, you just want to make them clearer. What the world looks like is really just like if you're like presenting a new world, like in this house prefers a word motion perhaps, or you're making a proposal in this house word motion, and you just want to like very clearly depict what it looks like so that your arguments can run better and like your impacts can actually run, because that's how you set up the world, that's how you set up the stage already from the beginning. So like I think that's how you build a model. I will have like an example of this later from my like personal speech, one of my favorite ones. But that's it basically for like these theories of making a setup, right? So thus far, I'm going to just move on to the next slide. Oops. Seems like there is no next slide. Right. So I'm just going to move on to giving you guys an example of a doc where I quite liked the setup I made. This was a WSDC format debate from last year. I think the setup here was just quite complete. So here was the motion. The motion was this house would transfer complete management of environmentally significant areas to an international body instead of the national government of that areas. Yeah, for example, control of the Amazon rainforest would be transferred to an international body instead of being under the control of the Brazilian government. There are some notes there that me and my team made, so just ignore those. But basically, here was like the setup that I made. The opening line is made based on our problem identification, which is that local government's power are contingent upon like their popularity, like how many people vote for them. And like that's going to make terrible environmental policies basically. And I made it like my opening to make it clear like what problem my team was going to address. And the rest was just, I just flagged this as a model, but actually like it was like a combination, I feel, of many of the stuff I mentioned earlier. So this one is just like, it's just defining the burden, saying that we can assume this will pass, like the transfer of that environmental area, like environmentally significant area is possible. And this was our definition, what counts as environmentally significant areas. So yeah, I just described it in these 3 points. And then this was the proposal that I tried to make, which is how the transfer will happen. And so this one is quite obvious. I won't be like reading it for you guys. I think you can just see it's just there just to like make it clear. But I think this one is where we get like quite strategic. So when I mentioned that we will not like evict the existing communities in the environmentally significant area, that prevents the opposition arguments, like saying that you will wipe out the culture of the people, for example, if they choose to bring that argument and stuff. But we're just like replacing the current governors with the international body, right? And like we will select those that have prior experience researching the area as well. So like we'll make sure that they are like way better at managing the environment compared to the local governments. And we just wanted to make this very clear from the start of our speech. So we put it in setup. And the next thing was just like this. The only thing we'll do is regulate the use of natural resources by the existing communities. We'll reduce the volume of natural resources extracted to meet good climate standards. And then I also made a preemptive status quo mechanism here. If that causes a loss of jobs or a loss of profit, we are happy to give these people unemployment benefits because we're responsible for like the short-term harms that we're inflicting on these people, right? And just like saying that in the long run, like alternate jobs are going to be springing up, and like these people are going to be able to move somewhere else for a job. They don't have to like be the people that continuously extract the natural resources there. So like, yeah, that's how like the setup just like made the debate have a clear direction. And I feel like it restricted just like silly opposition challenges or like silly opposition arguments. And that's why like I would probably call it a solid setup. So that's the example of a like setup that I made. Before I move on to like reviewing the setups that people have personally sent to me, I'm actually going to open time for questions. So, does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself. You can send it in the chat.
Hi. I'm wondering if it's possible for me to actually look into that docs like you sent to us.
Yeah, right. So I think I'm going to just do this. So you're talking about like the previous document where I had like a setup, right? Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I can just hang on. A bit clueless as to like how to do this. Okay, you know what? I'll just upload it sometime on Debating Forum 4's website. So just like check that out, be a member there regularly, refresh, so that like you'll find it there when it appears. Like basically that's going to be it. I feel like that's going to be the way that it's going to be accessible to as many people as possible. So yeah, I hope that's fine.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hang on. I think some people already sent in some questions in the chat. So I'm going to like answer those first actually. Right. So Ananta Chowdhury, sorry if I'm like butchering any of your names, by the way. I'm not like the best at that. Do you prefer the usage of personal pronouns or we, us, our? I think I have no preference. because I feel like different circuits would use like different kinds of pronouns. Some people say I, some people say we, some people say like some people just use different styles. I don't think it really matters. I think just do like what's comfortable for you. Right. The next question comes from Victor Camilo Ledesma. In the motion about the environment, how is the setup used to identify the most vulnerable actor? Right. So I think the type of debate that was not a debate that was like probably won by explaining the most vulnerable actor, although there is a vulnerable actor, which is probably like the people who suffer from climate change and stuff. But like I feel like that was generally a policy debate to solve the problems of like climate change in these environmentally significant areas. So that was mainly like how we did the strategy of the debate. That was how like we proved that we have better environmental benefits than our opposition, or like if the opposition chose to have like to prioritize the economy, then we just like went with environment is the most important thing, much more than economy. And like, yeah, that's how like we had the general strategy of the debate. There is, I think, Himangi was the person who unmuted last time before the next question popped up. So you can just unmute yourself now if you want to. Okay. I don't see anybody unmuting. Just like for anyone who felt like they unmuted earlier, if you want to ask the question, just like unmute yourself later anytime.
The person who unmuted was Ananta, and you answered her question already from the chat. So thank you.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, that's great to hear. The next question comes from Azzy. How do you determine whether you should bring a counterfactual or not? Okay. That's a fun question. I think the way that you determine that is just by looking at the status quo. The status quo going to be sufficient to solve the problems addressed by the opponent team, right? So maybe if you're debating about a conflict like in Myanmar and the government side wants to like have ASEAN try to, I don't know, try to have diplomatic talks, or maybe you want to have the West try to invade. That's something that definitely cannot be solved with organic mechanisms in the status quo. So you might want to bring up a counterfactual, which is like, I don't know, different forms of diplomacy, or maybe you want to like talk about negotiations. Maybe you want to fund the rebel groups, but not directly invade, or like basically any counterfactual that you deem to be strategic in that debate. If you think that the status quo isn't sufficient to tackle the problems addressed by your opponent. So that's how you determine that. Right. The next question is from Yon Woo Sin. How would you model a this house would debate if the technology existed debate? Examples include genetic mutations to combat climate change, etc. Right. So basically I'm assuming that like you will use the technology if it existed, right? So the way that you model that is in general just like describing how the technology would look like, what kind of problems it's going to be used to address, what kind of problems it's not going to be used to address. So like, maybe in like memory wiping debates, it's going to be addressed, like it's going to be used to like solve problems of people with severe psychological distresses, or like people who can demonstrate an importance in terms of psychology to use that machine, but not people who just want to use it arbitrarily or like randomly for fun. Perhaps like you would want to like have some restrictions for the things that are too risky for the technology. That's number one. You would have like to have restrictions. I think number two, what I can think of at the top of my head right now is just the idea of preemptive status quo mechanisms to typical arguments against those kinds of technology, that it's going to be inaccessible, that it's going to be misused. So you want to say like it's going to be accessible in the long term because companies will compete to produce the same kinds of technology, and like the prices will get cheaper, for example, or maybe the government will subsidize it so that it's accessible to everyone. And then in terms of misuse, you can talk about governments just regulating it so that there's nobody that can misuse this, punishments if people misuse the technology, to prevent those kinds of arguments appearing. Because like it's just an annoying debate if like the opponent brings up those kinds of arguments, right? So you want to like prevent that from the like time of setup so that they don't pop up. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. The next question from Mont Haspul Hadi. Should you include framing within your model or before? So there's this thing in the debating community, like we're never sure what someone means when they talk about framing, right? Because people have different interpretations of framing. So if you'd like to like, explain more what kind of framing are you talking about, that would be useful. But like, in my interpretation of a framing, which is just like anything that describes the debate that is like value neutral, that is just like, positioning where the debate actually is and what the debate is actually about. I feel like that can count in like the first thing that I mentioned, which is like limiting the debate to just like it's about a popularity of something, perhaps it's about dominance of something, it's about a narrative, stuff like that. It's about a certain actor. So whatever that is, I think that counts as framing as well. So that can be put in setup. And if you're talking about things like context, limiting the debate in that way, I think it can also be mentioned in setup. So the debate is about developing countries, perhaps, or the debate is only about countries that are instead just like rich enough to implement a certain, proposal, technology, whatever. So yeah, I feel like it's usually good to just like put it in setup for me. There's a question from Archie. In the motion, this house as radical left wing would actively oppose using capitalism to help the movement. For example, Squid Game or Karl Marx t-shirts. So herein, how do we decide what stance should Op take? Should they say we won't actively oppose it, or should they develop their case in no gray area, like we would support only? I think the question here is like, should opposition should opposition say that they want to support it, or should opposition just be neutral, like not actively opposing it, right? I hope I'm interpreting the question right. Right. As radical left wing opposing capitalism to help the movement. I think in that case, it's probably going to be beneficial to, like, I'm quite unsure about like using capitalism, what kind of capitalism you're using. Maybe like if it's criticisms of capitalism, if that's what the motion is trying to mean, then it's probably to say like support it. But like radical left wing just definitely wouldn't use blatantly capitalistic norms because that's like against their ideology, right? So I'm quite unsure about the motion wording here, but like what I would do if I had to like debate as opposition in that debate is like I would limit the debate to like criticisms of capitalism and like the types of like capitalist interpretations or like capitalistic satires that radical left wing can use. That's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is I would say like just support it because it's actually getting awareness for the movement and stuff, or like it's going to create lots of intersections for people who previously thought radical left wings were completely just radical or like just people who are crazy and stuff, right? Like there are people now who can start to see it as quite relatable and like can start to participate in the movement and stuff. So like you can have the case go to that direction if you have that set up. Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions that we will take now. Thank you everyone for your eagerness and I hope I answered your questions well. I'm just going to review the cases that people submitted so far. There are still 3 responses, no more new ones. So yeah, that's cool. So let's just check the first document. I'll resume my screen share in a moment. Right. So this is a motion with a context slide. It's about the upper out system. So basically, you have to like go up in the ranks of a company in a like period of time. If you fail to do so, you will get kicked out of the organization, basically, right? Like that's the summary of the context slide. It's practiced by many accounting, consulting, and law firms, especially in the United States. And the motion is this house opposes the upper out system. And the setup that was submitted here had these following elements. Okay, so some of this is in Indonesian. I think it's because like I'm Indonesian. They just like submitted it in Indonesian, but I'll like translate it for everyone later. Actually, I'll do it right now. So like this part of the setup basically says, but in general, like law enforcers will get like minor or major cases, whatever they're assigned to, they can't really choose. But if you want to go to the higher ranks, you have to be lucky enough to keep on being the one that's chosen to like handle the biggest cases, because like that's how you get the most merit, that's how you get the most recognition in the system. And I think so this person is going to the direction that like, okay, this system is actually something that's like based on luck, like whether you go up in the organization or not is something that's based on luck, and like it's unfair. I think they want to like go to that direction, right? So there are several ways that this setup can be can be improved. I think the stance is, yeah, there's no like alternate stance that can be had in the Gov team here. I think the burden, so I think this is quite false when you say like it's not to prove what system is better. If you are in this house opposes motion, you do have the burden to like prove a counterfactual. What is going to be the counterfactual if there is no up or out system, and why that's going to be better? Because otherwise, if you don't prove that it's better, then the up or out system with all its flaws might be the only choice, might be like the best choice or like the lesser evil. So like that's like something you have to fix in order to like have a better position in the debate, I feel. So you would have to then explain a counterfactual, and the counterfactual would just be a system where like you don't get kicked out if you don't progress. You just like, if you stay in your current position, then that's fine. Well, of course, you won't get a pay raise, or you won't get a significant pay raise, and you will get a significant pay raise only if you actually go up. But like, it's also fine to stay as long as you still are contributing, as long as you're still participating in discussions, you're still present in meetings and stuff. And like, yeah, that's the like system that you want to defend on the Gov side. But like, for the reasons why that's good, that's like stuff that you want to explain in your arguments for your setup. You just want to like have that counterfactual first. In terms of like the problem identification, which is something that I think they try to do here, in terms of like saying that like people who are lucky enough to get like big cases as a lawyer would find it easier for them to climb up through the ranks. So I think I'm not sure if that's how the law system works. I'm not familiar with the like law system actually, but like since the debate is not only about lawyers, the debate is also about like accounting and consulting firms. I feel like it shouldn't be based on luck, or like opposition would definitely contest that it's not based on luck. It's based on like your previous performances in previous cases, because like people are not going to like just randomly trust other people with like the big cases if if they are not that qualified, right? So I think to be like safer and to be more strategic, there can be something that's improved in the problem identification. And I think like the main thing that should be opposed here is just that perhaps the idea that like some people, even though they're like, like not that, sorry, okay, no, I just got like a better case. So I think with the upper out system, what's going to be prominent is just the idea of like exploitation, right? Because the competition, so like the cap of how much work you should be doing is no longer capped by like how many hours you should be putting at work, but it's capped by like how your biggest competitor actually performs, right? Because if you want to go up, you have to stand out from all of the people around you. If you don't want to get kicked out, you have to like be the people who are actually standing out enough to get promoted, right? Like that's why that opens up like possibilities for exploitation or like workers just generally overworking themselves, and like that's not going to be healthy, right? Because it's going to just like be too toxic in general. And like even though it's something that's only like present in these many accounting, consulting, law firms in the United States, it's still a system that's probably like inherently immoral. Like, if you force workers to get like overworked, even though they all still receive the same pay, for example, and stuff. I think that's a case that you can run in that debate. So like that's like the general feedback that I would probably have for this setup. Thank you so much for submitting it. That's an interesting motion. So yeah, I hope that helped. Let's move on to the next case that was submitted. So here we have another motion. This House believes that vegetarians and vegans have a moral obligation to aggressively lobby their friends and community to not consume animal products, and they're acting as government. Cool. We have an opening line and a very bulky setup here. Right. I think the opening line, generally correct direction, can probably improve by being more specific, because the harm that you create here, that you're talking about, is animals getting killed, and vegans are like people who have like, who care about this the most, because they are the ones that are most committed to be against this like animal eating lifestyle, right? So can be more specific there. Just to be more nuanced in the debate. Setup, I think the first thing here is just definition. What are animal products? And they focused on the characteristics of the producers. So I'm not trying to be lazy here, but it's just a matter of preference. I feel like just like the characteristics of like actors, the characterization of actors is usually better placed inside an argument, because it's usually the things that become the likelihood that support your harm arguments or like your benefit arguments, right? So here, let's try to review this regardless. The corporations that make them are very transparent in the production process. They mistreat their workers, very low wages. So I think it's probably quite difficult to make this like very, very, like the first thing you want to talk about in the debate, or like the main thing that you want to talk about in the debate, because this seems to be an argument against like, exploitative companies in general. I don't see why this is an exclusive trait to animal products, because like there are other companies whose products are in very high demand as well, like things like fast fashion, and those corporations also have like great power in lobbying the government as well. And I feel like that's also not playing in the best case of the opponent team. So like that's probably also why not going to be that charitable to the opponent team, or like not that specific to the motion. So yeah, I probably would not include this if I was debating and like trying to make a setup. In general, I think just like, let's go to the next stuff. What does the alternative look like? 3 layers of analysis. Obviously, they're made with animal products. They're almost always ethically made, or at least do. But even if they don't, remember that vegan products are still very new and low demand right now. Yeah, I think this is fair. Can probably make it a bit shorter, like reducing the examples here and stuff, so that you can just like focus on the more important parts of your speech, which is your arguments, because this seminar is, funnily enough, about to be 1 hour long, even though it's like only about the first minute probably of your speech, right? But like, yeah, and I feel like that's kind of like a trend in my circuit personally. in Indonesia that like these setups that like high school debaters are making are getting quite long. I don't know if like that's happening anywhere else, but like I'm quite unsure why that's a trend right now. I'm personally like quite strict about limiting my setup to a maximum of 2 minutes, but I usually try to make it just like 1 minute, right, to be as efficient and to just focus on the arguments, because the setups are just like setting up the debate, while the arguments are like the, you know, like your ammunition to actually win the round, right? Yeah, so I think like I'll try to like review the setup and like also specifically provide suggestions for how to make it as efficient as possible. Yeah. So the last part of the setup was this moral obligation of light arts out of the house. Vegans using all their ability to convince their community to stop consuming animal products, inform and educate people of all the plant-based alternative products people can use. Yeah, so I feel like these are things that you will inevitably mention as examples in your arguments. So it's okay to like not mention it in your you know, in your setup. But, like, it might also be fun. No, actually, yeah, I have no preference for this. The examples are quite fine. This is also quite clear. Informing and educating people of these alternatives. Probably want to just like, you know, talk about this and then move on to this, because you explain the alternatives more here while you're just like mentioning that there are alternatives here. So just like make it flow, you know, linearly, and so that it's like good as a judge to like note this down and stuff. So yeah, it's, I think like the main advice I would have for this setup is just to make it more efficient so that you can actually focus on the other parts of your speech, because like it's not mandatory that you always have to make your setups, you know, completely bulky. It's only like as bulky as it needs to be, as bulky as like it's important to do. I think there can also be an extra preemptive status quo layer to be added here. So opposition probably will say like, this shouldn't be a moral obligation because what if this makes them hated, or like what if the community are just unable to afford the vegan lifestyle and stuff. I feel like then the moral obligation only applies when it is like, you know, when it is possible for them to do so. So like, you know, you wouldn't go up to the mayor of your town and say that you're not a vegan right now, there's something inherently wrong with you, you know, like it's not, that's not something that you're going to say. It's going to be like, it's going to scale based on the ability of this person to convince them. And like, it's going to scale based on like maybe the, you know, the risk that the vegan person would receive if they actually try to convince those people to do that, right? So it's like the moral obligation is only whenever you can do it, you should like aggressively lobby your friends and community when it's like reasonable to do so. So you might want to like have a preemption towards that direction just to make the debate go to a right direction. So yeah, that's my opinion on this setup. Thank you again for submitting the setup, and I hope that helped. The last setup that we have is, okay, it's on a motion about the government predominantly basing its policies on the country's gross national happiness, and they were very nice to mention all the 9 metrics of gross national happiness here, so it's fun. Right. See a problem identification. Imagine if we live in a country where the, right. So I think this can be a lot like just meaner and like directly to the point, I feel, because you want to like address the problem, which is like something that is negative that arises currently in the status quo that you want to try to address. And that problem is just people being too overworked, people suffering in like the capitalistic world where they have to work, where they have to compete all the time, perhaps, that like it's very, very hard to access happiness. Maybe there are things like a lot of mental health problems among youth nowadays, and it makes you hard to like feel happy and stuff. So you want to focus on like those urgent issues that make your speech feel more urgent and important, even from the first second that you speak. So that's what I would have for like the problem. Stance, yeah, sure. So stance and goal, yeah, these are, I think like also just in general, when you feel like your stance and goal is something that is like quite obvious, then you can just like skip it because the adjudicator already knows there's probably like you're not going to have any speaker scores or any winning possibilities added if you have that sentence in your speech. So like just actively have that intent and filter everything that you want to say. Like, why am I saying this? Is this going to make me win the debate more? If it's not, then it's probably okay not to say it. And in terms of goal, so I feel like this is something that is generally taught to to newbie debaters, but I don't feel like it's something that's that strategic to use anymore now, because it's usually quite difficult to prove that you're able to achieve that goal because your opponent is going to rebut you. At the end of the debate, you're going to only have like one clash standing, perhaps, but just the more important clash, or maybe you're going to have like all of your clashes standing, but they're like rebutted or mitigated in some way. So like at the end of the debate, it's very, very difficult for you to achieve your goal usually. And like, I don't usually see the added benefit of teams saying what their goal is, because usually the main goal is just like solving the problem. And like that is already conveyed by you mentioning what the problem is, and by you in your arguments mentioning what the step-by-step mechanisms are to like be able to solve that problem. So I usually think like in general goal is quite redundant, and maybe like it's okay to skip it and focus on the more important parts. Right, so they had a model here, a framework. They mentioned the 9 values of GNH. I think there is probably no need to like actually mention all the 9 values of GNH, but like just really summarize it to what constitutes happiness. But okay, as you know, as far as this goes, it's actually quite okay. It's not that long. We are adopting this method because it will increase our country's overall productivity within our workforce. Right. So I think there's more like there's definitely a more strategic direction that can be taken here, because I think increasing productivity within the workforce is what opposition is going to bring when they prioritize like GDP. They're going to like just boost the economy as much as possible at the expense of people's happiness. And like in this debate, it's quite clear if you imagine from the beginning, and if you have a like preemptive mindset from the beginning of what the opponent is likely going to bring, what the clashes are going to be, that the debate is about like happiness versus economy. And in that case, you don't want to be trying to go for economy when you're the side that has to defend happiness, because it's going to be very, very hard for you to win that, right? So what you want to have is like, it's not like good because it increases productivity within your workforce, but it's good because happiness is something that every person should have a right to, for example, or maybe just the fact that like money and financial or material success is not something that everyone is going to be able to access, because like some people are definitely going to be richer than others, because it's very hard to solve like equality. So at least you should have to like, at least you should prioritize everyone being happy, because it's something that's like accessible and because everyone deserves to get it. So that's like a more strategic direction that you should like push your case towards in this case, so that you have a better chance at winning it. They have some characterization, conditions of status quo. This just means the person, situation in Indonesian. All of its policies based on our GNH. The people will be having a better life. Yeah, so this is nice to say, but I don't think like there's actually any added benefit of like having this on top of like the GNH stuff that you already mentioned here, because that's what you're going to do, and this is like how you're going to feel while doing it. I again, like the idea of intent, right? Like filtering everything that doesn't give you added benefit to win the debate. I would probably like just skip through this part. The next part is what will our world look like. So see, this is like what's happening. People's setups are getting quite long nowadays. Like I judged a few competitions in my country, and like they all have long setups, and I don't really know why. Right, what will our world look like? We want happy citizens that are proud to live in their country because they can live a good life. a good life is where citizens are simply happy in what they're doing and how they're doing. Yeah, like actually, same comment as before. There's probably not that much added benefit to like add this. Let's see the mechanism. What will happen under our site? Policies based on they'll feel happy. We want her. I feel like this is also like repeating a lot of the stuff that was already present from the above. And here is where like the exclusive stuff that are not repetitive actually start, right? So this is like the more important part of your case that is already good that you want to focus on, like ease of access to mental health therapy, accessible education. And I think you should also explicitly say that if a policy is beneficial to the economy, like what the opposition would try to defend, but it causes things like exploitation or it causes things like a lot of stress, then the country is not going to pass that policy. The country is instead going to provide the workers a lot of insurance, a lot of just happiness, a lot of insurance of like mental stability and stuff, family time, things like pregnancy leave, like maternal leave, paternal leave, all those stuff, like just to be more explicit on that. Opposition doesn't need to worry about our nation being too unruly in our strive for happiness. No government is that dumb. Our country will not let citizens run. Yeah. Sure thing. Can shorten the sentences perhaps just by saying that we're not going to be reckless because law and order still exists. We're not going to we're not going to allow people to access happiness that is done by taking the happiness of other people and stuff, or like violating the rights of other people. So yeah, can like just summarize that in one sentence perhaps to just make the speech a lot more efficient and so that you can move into your arguments a lot quicker. Let me think if like there are any other important things that can be brought here. Yeah, I think that's generally all for this motion, like just very, very generally. So yeah, thank you again as well for submitting this case. Right. Okay. Actually, there's one more case, but it seems like the time is up. So I'm going to just like allow the person that sent the setup to just personally contact me, or like I will also try to find their contact. But thank you so much everyone for like coming to this seminar, for like participating, asking questions, and submitting your setups for those who submitted it. I hope my advice helped, and I hope you learned something new from here. And I hope you can improve in making more solid setups in the future. Thank you so much, everyone, and yeah, have a good rest of the day.